Welcome back to Score on Business. I'm Pete Hendricks, your host today. Remember to check us out, scorenashville.org. So our next guest is Norma Shirk, and Norma is with Compliance Risk Advisor, LLC. Corporate Compliance Risk Advisor assists executive management in understanding which employment laws apply to their companies. Then they work together to meet compliance considering the size and budget. So it's HR and compliance, and you're an attorney, though you don't practice.
Right,
yes.
Correct.
So I understand you helped a nonprofit progress from a $15,000 grant to a $100,000 grant. What did you do?
Oh, they were one of my earliest clients, a wonderful little nonprofit. They do a great job. They had a $15,000 grant from the state of Tennessee, and they were told they could qualify for a $100,000 grant, which would let them expand their mission.
Oh, sure.
But they needed to be able to show that they actually knew which laws applied to them, employment laws, and that they were in compliance. So I helped them create and update their employee handbook, and we also looked at streamlining some of their back office administrative procedures and kind of tightening those up so that they looked a little more professional. They had sort of grown topsy-turvy at that point.
Right, so you got some organization. Was there computer systems or software involved in that?
They had a computer system, but they were still pretty much on Excel spreadsheets, which was fine. It worked for them.
Sure.
They just needed to tighten up how they tracked information so that they could accurately and quickly track all of the money that was coming in, because they received most of their money from state grants, but they also had donations from individuals.
Well, I'll tell you, that's a massive increase.
It allowed them to expand their staff, to expand the number of people that they help, and they are now on the way to launching to even more expanded services, but that was the baseline that they had to set for themselves.
Good. Well, good, and luckily they met you. Okay, and so your website is complianceriskadvisor.com.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what are common points where entrepreneurs run into HR trouble?
Probably the first thing is not realizing as a new company that employment laws actually apply to them, and that employment laws start kicking in the minute that you have at least one employee.
Yeah, there's no flying under the radar.
Right, no flying under the radar. So, for example, there's a federal law summarized as USERRA, and it's about if you have people from the military, like National Guard or Reserve folks on your staff. The USERRA requires that you allow those folks to go off if they're called for active duty service, which has been an issue in the last 13 years. And then to bring them back in at basically the same place where they were in seniority and pay when they went off to the military. So that law kicks in when you have just one employee. A lot of people don't know that. Most people are more familiar with the worker comp laws that kick in when you have 5 employees, and then you move on to the big things that happen with 50 employees, which can be things like the Family Medical Leave Act, which requires up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave for someone caring for a person. Most commonly, it's for someone who's having a baby.
Yeah.
And other laws that kick in at that point, for example, the Affordable Care Act, that law applies to all employers, but the penalty for employers if they don't meet all the mandates starts when you have at least 50 employees.
Okay. So if a company has less than 50, it sounds like they're required to do the affordable care, but what happens if they don't?
Yeah, the big thing is if you have less than 50 employees, there's no penalty if you get it wrong, in essence.
Yeah.
For those with more than 50, obviously, there's
Right.
potentially a penalty. So what is it that you have to do to get it right? If you have more than 50 employees, you're not required to offer a group health plan to your employees, but if you don't, you're potentially subject to a $2,000 penalty per year per full-time employee.
Yeah.
That can get expensive.
Oh, that would get expensive pretty quick.
And then the second
Yeah.
part to the penalty is if you offer insurance, but it doesn't meet the guidelines set in the law on the cost sharing and on the amount of premium that the employee has to pay, then there's a penalty for that. That's a little more difficult to be assessed, because if an employee is not offered the insurance and is full-time, goes to the marketplace or the exchange and qualifies for one of the subsidies to help pay for coverage, individual coverage, then the second part of the employer penalty kicks in at that point.
But that's for 50 plus.
Right, that's for
Okay.
50 plus. But if you're under 50,
Yeah.
you still have to meet all of the mandates on cost sharing and the premium amount and so on. But if you don't, then there's no penalty. If you don't
Right.
offer any health insurance, there's no penalty
Okay.
to the employer.
Now, your focus is really compliance, though I think this question will be in your bailiwick. When should a company have an employee handbook?
I would say when you get about 5 employees,
Okay.
and between 5 and 10, and the reason is I think of it as crowd control. When you
Yeah.
have less than 5 employees, you can kind of do things on the fly, and
Right.
and it doesn't really affect things too much. When you
Yeah.
get 5 or more employees, suddenly you have to start thinking about, are we properly staffing during
Right.
our business hours? Does everybody know what's expected of them? Do they know, for example, if you have a retail location, what's accepted attire for the day?
Oh, yeah.
If you have a business, for example, I've had a client that was a home alarm company, and so the folks for that company are expected to have a certain attire when they go out to make them easily recognizable to a homeowner.
Yeah.
So a handbook at that point is where you communicate that to people when they first come into the company.
Okay. So this one is a biggie. Companies would like to have 1099 employees. Talk about that. The having people who you think are 1099 that are really employees and what the implication is.
Yeah, most companies when they start out, they don't have employees, or maybe they have 1 or 2. Oftentimes it's the owner of the company, and so they outsource a lot of what they do, and that means working with independent contractors. That's your 1099. Then as you go along and you get more things going, more income, suddenly some of those people you might bring in-house as employees. Some of them you're still using your outsourced folks, but you're treating them like employees. And the employment test, the difference between a 1099 and a W-2 employee comes down to control. Do you tell them when to do the job and how to do it? Do you provide the tools in, the computers, the workspace, whatever? And the more control you have, the more likely they are to be
Right.
a W-2, not a 1099. And commonly for small employers that are just starting out,
Okay.
they don't make that gap.
Pardon me for interrupting, but we're going to run out of time. So when companies get that wrong, they've got people that they're thinking of. What are the penalties? What happens if they get caught?
The penalties depend on who is coming after them,
Okay.
which regulator. If it's the IRS, you could end up, as happened to Microsoft, and FedEx is, I believe, still fighting their case. Misclassifications can mean that you have to pay a bunch of taxes, employment taxes, that you never as a company paid
Okay.
before.
So it's we've only got a few more, another moment here. It's a big deal. Like, it's not something that you
Oh no, it's something that can affect the finances of the company and of individual workers.
Thanks so much, Norma. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for this week. Thank you so much. Remember, scorenashville.org. Thanks for being here.
Okay.
I thought that was awesome.
Oh, great.